Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. The auto industry has survived semiconductor shortages, battery mineral bottlenecks, and geopolitical tariff crossfire. But now the battle has shifted from assembly lines to federal courtrooms. In January 2026, BYD's U.S. subsidiaries sued the federal government in the U.S. Court of International Trade, challenging sweeping tariffs imposed under emergency executive authority. This isn't just about EV imports or pricing pressure, it's about presidential trade power, billions in potential refunds, and the structural future of cross-border EV manufacturing. Let's break down what's really unfolding. Legal shockwave. BYD challenges presidential trade power. This isn't rumor, it's a full-scale legal confrontation. In January 2026, several North American subsidiaries of BYD filed suit in the U.S. Court of International Trade, arguing the government exceeded its authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. The company claims emergency powers were stretched beyond statutory limits to impose sweeping tariffs without congressional approval. The defendants include Customs and Border Protection, the Treasury Department, and the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. At its core, this case questions whether emergency economic authority can be repurposed into long-term trade policy. If courts find the actions ultra-vires beyond legal authority, it could recalibrate the foundation of modern tariff enforcement and redefine executive power in trade governance. But this legal battle isn't happening in a vacuum, it directly affects how BYD operates on American soil. BYD's U.S. footprint, manufacturing power inside America. Before reducing this to a simple foreign versus domestic clash, consider BYD's American footprint. Since 2013, the company has operated a manufacturing facility in Lancaster, California, assembling electric buses for municipal fleets across North America. That means American labor, domestic assembly lines, and localized production strategy, not just imported vehicles arriving at port. Beyond buses, BYD's U.S. portfolio includes battery energy storage systems and commercial fleet electrification programs. Tariffs on imported components, battery cells, power electronics, drivetrain modules don't just affect cross-border shipments. They disrupt cost structures, procurement contracts, and long-term capital allocation. For a manufacturer balancing domestic assembly with globally sourced components, tariff volatility introduces operational instability, influencing everything from pricing models to factory expansion decisions. Before we delve deeper, do us a favor and smash that like and subscribe button. This helps us reach more auto enthusiasts just like you. Now that we understand BYD's industrial footprint, we need to examine the legal engine powering this dispute. The IEEPA Showdown, Emergency Powers versus Trade Limits. The heart of the dispute lies in the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a law traditionally used for sanctions, asset freezes, and financial restrictions during national emergencies. The question now is whether that statute authorizes broad trade tariffs without Congress explicitly approving them. BYD's lawsuit joins thousands filed by importers since 2024, all challenging whether emergency authority can substitute for structured tariff legislation. Historically, trade policy has functioned like a dual-clutch system. Congress designs the statutory framework, while the executive branch executes within defined limits. Critics argue using IEEPA for sweeping tariffs expands executive power beyond congressional intent. Supporters claim modern economic threats demand flexible tools. The Court of International Trade has paused many cases pending higher court clarification, leaving tariff legality and the balance of trade power in judicial neutral. And that judicial neutral leads us to the highest court in the country. Supreme Court variable, a ruling that reshapes trade power. The reason these cases are effectively idling is a separate lawsuit from a New York wine importer that challenged similar tariff authority. Lower courts ruled that the president may have exceeded statutory limits under IEEPA. The federal government appealed, and the Supreme Court heard arguments in late 2025, with a ruling expected in 2026. That decision will set binding precedent, either reinforcing broad executive trade authority or sharply limiting it. The current stay prevents conflicting rulings across thousands of cases. For automakers and EV manufacturers, this creates strategic limbo. Investment timelines, cross-border battery sourcing, drivetrain component imports, and pricing strategies all depend on how the court interprets emergency trade powers. The outcome could reshape U.S. trade enforcement architecture for years to come. But the ripple effects extend far beyond Washington's courtroom. Mexico and Brazil, the global manufacturing chessboard. BYD's legal fight doesn't stop at U.S. borders. The company has expanded capacity in Brazil and explored production in Mexico, both crucial nodes in the global automotive supply chain. Under the USMCA framework, Mexico has become a manufacturing powerhouse, but tariff volatility complicates the equation. If vehicles assembled in Mexico or Brazil face elevated duties due to component origin rules or executive trade measures, cost advantages can evaporate overnight. For automakers balancing labor efficiency, logistics, and drivetrain integration, predictability matters. This case signals a shift. Multinational manufacturers are no longer just adapting to policy, they're strategically challenging it. And if the courts ultimately side against Washington, the financial consequences could be enormous. If Washington falls, billions in tariff consequences. If courts rule that the tariffs exceeded statutory authority, the financial consequences could be massive. Importers may seek billions in duty refunds, depending on scope and retroactivity. But don't expect instant clarity. Administrative reviews, congressional responses, and potential legislative fixes would all influence the final outcome. Even if IEEPA authority is narrowed, Congress could engineer new tariff mechanisms. For automakers already juggling battery sourcing, motor assembly, and semiconductor supply, legal exposure is now as critical as raw material pricing. Trade risk has become part of the modern automotive cost structure, and this financial uncertainty feeds into a much larger strategic debate. Electrification versus protectionism, the industrial strategy clash. This lawsuit unfolds amid an escalating global EV race. Chinese manufacturers continue expanding abroad, while the United States pushes localization and domestic battery production. Tariffs serve as both shield and sword, protecting local jobs while influencing competitive dynamics. Supporters argue trade barriers safeguard industrial resilience. Critics warn they inflate prices and restrict consumer choice. BYD's challenge drags this policy debate into constitutional territory. The issue isn't simply imported EV competitiveness, it's whether trade enforcement tools align with legal authority. In today's landscape, trade law is shaping automotive strategy as decisively as battery chemistry or motor efficiency. Which brings us to the ultimate crossroads for the industry. Verdict: America's tariff power at a crossroads. So where does this leave the industry? At a pivotal intersection. This case isn't just about one automaker contesting tariffs, it's about the legal horsepower behind executive trade authority. If the Supreme Court limits emergency tariff powers, it could recalibrate how future administrations deploy economic tools. If it upholds them, expect trade enforcement to remain an aggressive instrument in industrial policy. For manufacturers, legal and geopolitical variables now sit alongside torque curves and battery densities in strategic planning. Factory placement, component sourcing, and vehicle pricing models increasingly hinge on judicial interpretation as much as engineering innovation. Now we want to hear from you. Should emergency economic powers extend to sweeping tariffs? Do protectionist measures strengthen domestic EV manufacturing or distort competition? And if you were a global automaker, where would you build your next platform under this uncertainty? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe to Piston Pundit to stay ahead of the next vehicle updates and industry shifts. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. You can now check out any of the videos on the screen, there's plenty more to explore.